And good afternoon, 403. Mark Westwood on the radio with you. Coming up next on The Mark, live with me. Anyway, take a look at traffic. Ontario, stop-and-go traffic, I-15 southbound between I-10 and Harupa Street. Ontario, 15 south is slow and stretches from the 10 to the Cahelco Road, and north is slow from the 60 to the 10. On Riverside, stop-and-go traffic, I-215 northbound between Blaine and 3rd Street and Highway 60. And in Riverside, 250 north is slow from about Lacadena. South is slow from the 10 to Central. Let's look at our weather and traffic from the only station that leaves no listener behind, KCAA, 1050 AM.
It gets real, it's live, it's really live, local and in motion. Every day on KCAA, the Inland Empire's only live local motion talk. KCAA 1050 AM and KCAAradio.com.
Here's a look at the KCAA community calendar. I'm Di Rice. It's the George Brown Legacy Project, and you're invited to be a part. Help support the archives of the late great congressmen that were established at UCR. George Brown was a pioneer and a trailblazer who served in Congress from 1973 to 1999 when he passed. Brown fought for the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. He established the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970, and he was instrumental in creating a bill that became the NASA Authorization Act of 2005. The NASA Authorization Act supports research, development, and space exploration, Brown's passion. The George Brown Springtime Reception will be held Saturday, May 9th from 3 until 5 with special guest Congressman Pete Aguilar. For ticket information, please call 323-669-9999. That's a look at the community calendar on KCAA 1050 AM.
The views of the following show are not necessarily the views of broadcast management or its owner, Fred Lundgren. But then again, the views of broadcast management are, different. And now it's time for On The Mark Live with host Mark Westwood. Finally, a show about KCAA. Hot topics, a little locomotion, current events, news, laugh, reviews, and a little irreverence. And you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, 3, 2, 1, Mark.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. There I go. And Joe Brett, one of these days. Anyway, Joe and the live audience out there, welcome to KCAA. I'm just a little overmodulated now, Joe, so turn it down just a little bit. Mark Westwood with you on the mark here, and getting ready the beautiful sound of good balanced audio board. We've got a live show today, and it is always full of fun and unexpected things, but we get to the first part of the show. We're in good shape. We have a fun-filled action-packed show today. First of all, we will be interviewing one of our newest legislators in Sacramento, Senator Connie Leyva, in just a moment. We also, at the second part of our show, you might have heard about the George Brown Legacy Project in our community calendar just a few minutes ago. We're going to go more into depth about that, the George Brown Legacy Project, which is the effort to establish his files at the University of California, Riverside. George Brown, the Environmental Protection Agency, NASA, the Office of Science and Space Exploration. He did it. He brought it all about. He was a very, very intellectual man, and he brought lots of those great things to us here. We're going to be talking about that. But first of all, I, with no further ado, want to introduce our guest. And it's indeed a privilege and honor to have Senator Connie Leyva with us. She was elected in November, just this past year, to represent the 20th State Senate District, and she is serving her first term in the California State Senate. The district includes the cities and communities of Bloomington, Chino, Colton, Fontana, Grand Terrace, Montclair, Muscoy, Ontario, Pomona, Rialto, and most of San Bernardino. She's got her hands full. As a state senator, Senator Leyva is committed to improving California's schools, environment, and communities. She's a lifelong activist standing up and working for people. When I first met Senator Leyva, she was with the United Food and Commercial Workers Union Local 1428. So with no further ado, Joe, do we have Senator Leyva on the line? Hello, Senator Leyva. Are you there? Okay, Senator Leyva, do we have you? Okay. we're going to try that again, and I'll go on a little bit about Senator Leyva. She started at Alpha Beta. Does everybody remember the Alpha Beta grocery stores? Well, Alpha Beta was a store that I think got bought up by other grocery stores, and later on became Safeway, Vons, Albertsons, and she started out there working there as a checker and worked her way up, and like cream always rises to the top. She became the first woman president of the California Labor Federation, representing more than 2.1 million workers in the state. Do we now have Senator Leyva on the line? Hello, Senator Leyva.
Hi, Mark. I think I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for the audio difficulties there, but now all's well that ends well, and it's good. It is indeed a privilege and honor to have you, and greetings.
You too.
Are you local or in Sacramento today?
I am in Sacramento in my office.
Okay, and so let's start there. In Sacramento, you've been up there now a couple of months, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, maybe. I don't know. How long has it been?
4 months.
4
Started
months.
January 5th.
And are you getting used to the flying back and forth and the lifestyle?
I am. It's not bad at all. I'm so happy to be here and feel like I can actually make a difference for the constituents of SD20. So the flights are not a problem.
Well, Senator Leyva, you're serving over just under 1 million people, lots of people. And I like to say Senate District 20 is the KCAA district because you look at our coverage map and then you look at Senate District 21 and it's virtually almost the same cities and everything else. So
that's great.
It's great to have you on here.
Thank you.
A district that's very diverse, but yet is 68.4% Hispanic, 15% white, 8% black, 0.25% Native America, and 5% Asian, and then a rest of the big mix there. A lot of people, a lot of different needs.
That is correct.
So, I'll just ask you a question here. We've got some things I'd like to talk about in a little while, and that is maybe drought or vaccinations or your pet project like keeping seniors in their homes and paid family leave. But, when you were up there, I asked Congressman Pete Aguilar on Saturday at a forum that we were at, what is the biggest thing that you see that you didn't see when you're down here and you see those big issues like we do, but when you get up in Sacramento, there's a little bit more of a microcosm, a little bit more of a directed, focused view, and you see something that needs to be changed. What would that be with you?
Well, as far as a specific issue that needs to be changed, and it's not a small issue, water, that certainly the drought is a big issue. There's been a lot of talk up here. We've been working with the governor. The Senate just signed off on a letter on Tuesday giving the governor some of our insights onto what we think we should do. But I would say probably what surprised me the most coming up here is we hear so much negativity about politics, and we hear so much negativity about Sacramento, and how refreshing it was to find that there are so many people here, so many elected officials that really care very much about their constituents and about the state of California, and are really looking to do the right thing for all people, especially working folks.
Yeah, we're in a drought, and don't you agree that but if we use our water wisely, we'll make it through this drought just fine?
Yes, I think that's right, Mark. I also think that I think all of us need to understand that we live in a state that is primarily a desert, and we need to kind of start thinking of it like that. We need to make sure we regulate our water use, understand how much we're using, where it goes. I think most people don't realize that 55 to 60% of their water use at their home actually goes to outside lawns and gardening and that sort of thing. So, we put in some more drought-resistant plants, and I think that will help and go a long way.
Yeah, they call it xeriscaping. Xeriscaping is where you plant like cactuses and drought-resistant plants. And you know what? I've seen a few of those. Former Assemblyman John Longville has a xeriscape in his front yard over here in San Bernardino. And it really is gorgeous. It looks great.
They look beautiful, absolutely. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, and, especially after I heard this news, and I don't know whether you've heard this or not, but on Tuesday, Governor Jerry Brown suggested fining water wasters up to $10,000 per violation. Ouch! I don't know if I support that. But
yes, well, that we heard about it at the same time that you did. So that is interesting, a $10,000 fine. That is to businesses per day, obviously not to individual people or families.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the governor wants to make sure everyone understands the seriousness of the drought.
Yeah, and I think maybe some of that was coming out in his frustration because, we see so many, especially corporations, that just haven't, they haven't reduced anything. They've got that blue Kentucky grass growing, thick, and they just turn that water on at noon and at 4 and at 3, and they run it for hours at a time. In San Bernardino, they stopped watering a lot of the parks. which I don't like, but,
And, I don't think any of us like the way it looks, but I think we have to realize that this is something we have to do. We all turn on the spigot and the water comes out, and I think we forget that there's a lot that goes into making sure we have clean water and water available on tap all the time, and maybe we'll turn some of those parks into these zero-scapes.
Exactly. And there's a lot of things we can do, and, it really does, if we're careful, we can keep a little greenness
Yes.
without, flooding the plains, so to
I
speak.
think that's right, Mark. I agree.
Yeah, so, here in the Senate District, there are companies you can work with. I just talked to Toro the other day. They make a special drought-saving sprinkler head they're going to be giving away. And you can go to their website.
That's excellent.
They're giving it away. Otherwise, I wouldn't mention it because I wouldn't want to be selling stuff while I'm interviewing you. But,
Right.
but that's a good thing. I see that, hopefully we get a little more wetness, and next winter we'll start coming through this drought, and that's a very good thing. Let's talk about some of your projects that, you should be very, very proud of.
Thank you.
You introduced right out the gate some legislation to help keep seniors in their homes. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, absolutely. That is one of our bills. That is SB 426, protecting senior. That is SB 477, mobile home tax, keeping seniors in their homes, making sure that if they owe back taxes, those can be paid once they pass away, so that way they don't have to worry about being evicted.
And I live in a mobile home, by the way, so I love that. I'm not quite a senior yet, but I did get my ARP card the other day.
It's kind of scary when those come, isn't it?
It's like, uh-oh, I guess I'm not a teenager anymore.
No. And Mark, I'm glad you bring that up because I also asked to be on the Select Committee on Mobile Homes. You may or may not know that we have about 120 mobile home parks in SD20, which about 25,000 residents reside there. So I want to make sure we focus and make sure that folks living there are well taken care of.
And I live in Yucaipa. I think we've got about 25% of that up there.
There you go.
Lots of mobile homes.
We'll bleed over into Yucaipa and help them too. Help you guys out too.
That's right. And if you vote in the legislature, it affects everyone. So
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And so hopefully that a lot of people will stop on board. What's the progress of that, or what's the status of that bill right now?
It is now going to appropriations, and I do not have a date yet for that. So it'll be heard sometime in the coming weeks.
So it's got all the legalese and everything associated with it and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, that is correct.
A lot of people don't know how a bill actually becomes a bill. There used to be a national thing, on TV about, I'm just a bill, just an ordinary bill.
I remember. Schoolhouse Rock.
On Capitol Hill. Well, it's the same way in Sacramento. And, you kind of come up with an idea, right?
Yes.
And then you kind of make a summary. Is that correct?
Right. So we have an idea, and we come up with a summary, and then we pass it off to legal, who makes sure that we're not trying to do something that is illegal and something that is actually doable. So it comes back to us, and then it gets assigned to one or more committees that it has to be heard in front of, depending on the ramifications of the bill, and that's called single, double, or triple referred. And as an author of a bill, I would present the bill in front of however many committees are required, and hope that I get enough votes so that my bill gets out of committee. Appropriations is the last stop before it would get to the Senate floor, and I would hope that it passes off the Senate floor. Then it goes over to the Assembly, and if it gets out of the Assembly, it goes through all the committees over there, gets out of the Assembly floor, comes back if there's any changes, and then it would go to the governor's desk to be signed. So there's actually a lot to a bill and then possibly a law.
And then you have to make sure that you get your friends in the state assembly and the state senate to vote for it and the governor to sign it.
That's right. And hopefully it's my friends, but hopefully it's also just people who believe like me and think that it's something that will be good for everybody in the state of California.
Right. And hopefully it gets bipartisan support, because that is a bipartisan thing, taking care of our seniors.
Absolutely.
And, congratulations, by the way. You get 50 points on that.
Thank you.
Being able to state how a bill becomes a bill.
Oh,
I won't name names, but I talked to somebody once and they couldn't tell me that, and they were actually in office. I'm like, okay, wait a minute.
It kind of seems like something you need to learn early on, and I have awesome staff who has helped me to learn everything I need to know. I'm sure you still have a little more to learn.
Yeah, but you got a really, really good concept, and
thank you.
And I think that's some more people should learn how to do that, follow that. and stay on track and keep up with things, because when they get results they don't like, it's too late to hoot and holler at that point. It's time to get involved in the process.
You're absolutely right, and I enjoy the process, and I enjoy being a part of it, so that probably helps.
Yeah, and if people wanted to get involved in the process or consult you, and how would they do that?
So probably the best way would be for folks in the district to reach out to one of our district offices. We have an office in San Bernardino, and we have an office in Chino. So if a constituent had an idea, they had a concern, they can reach out to those either one of those offices, talk to our staff there, and then if it's something that needs to be handled up here in Sacramento, the district staff will let us know. It'll come up here to the staff, and we'll handle it from here. A lot of times, though, there's things that we can handle right in the district for constituents.
Okay. And there's a website that they can go to. Would you happen to know that website off the top of your head? Or?
I'm sure I have my website close by here. I think it's Connie Leyva, Senator Leyva, SD20, www.sd20.senate.gov.
Yeah, and you just have to. That's a long one. www.sd20.senate.gov and
.ca.
and .ca. And that's what Google is such a beautiful thing.
Well, I was going to say, but what I would really recommend is just Google Senator Leyva, and the website will come up, and all the information you could ever want should be there.
That's right, and that moves you up in the Google rankings. No?
Yeah, there you go. Hey, what the heck?
Well, we got about another 10 minutes left, and I want to talk about this thing that's very important to people when they have a death in the family, or a maternal, they've got somebody's pregnant, they got to take care of a baby, or somebody gets sick or is hurt on work or accident or whatever. It's called paid family leave.
And FMLA,
yes. You've got something going on about that, don't you?
I don't think I have any bills on FMLA. I have a Healthy Relationships and Safe Schools bill. That's the only thing I can think of that would be the closest to that.
Okay. I was mistaken on that, and I apologize.
That's okay. FMLA is really important. It's always good to plug that.
It is, and it is a good thing. And, so let's talk about some of the committees you're on, which you got placed. First of all, you are currently the president of the Democratic Caucus in the State Senate?
I am the chair of the Democratic Caucus, correct.
Okay, the chair.
Yes.
What an honor.
I know. I feel very honored to do that. When the pro tem called back in December and asked if I would do that, I said I would be honored to be the chair of the caucus.
Well, that's really great. That's Senator Darrell. No. What is the chair of the Senate? I apologize.
The pro tem De Leon?
De Leon, yes. Okay.
Senator De Leon.
Oh, no, it's De Leon now.
Yes.
Oh, okay, that changed.
Senator Steinberg it termed out, and Senator De Leon was installed, I believe, last year.
Well, Mr. Kevin De Leon, I really, really apologize. I met him a long time ago.
He's a pretty good guy. I don't think he'll take offense to that.
He'll cajole me the next time.
Yes.
It's some event down here. But so then you're also on the Appropriations Committee?
That is correct, yes.
And for our listeners, what does that do, the Appropriations Committee?
So every bill goes through appropriations, and we hear them, and most, I say all, but it's probably 90% of the bills go through appropriations. There are some bills that are on consent, so they would not go through appropriations. But we hear them, and they are bills that would be have a monetary effect. And then part of our job with the chair and with leadership is kind of to decide where the money gets spent.
And then, of course, one that affects a lot of people, the Education Committee.
Yes, I love Education Committee. It's wonderful to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's some other ones, the Joint Legislative Audit and Rules. That's not so glamorous, but, transportation and housing, that's kind of a cool one.
I love transportation and housing. We need so much work in both of those areas in SD20. I was very excited to get to be there on that committee, and also the Energy Committee. That one's also one I believe that is very important, not only to the entire state, but to SD20.
And to a lot of our people out there that maybe disagree with people who want to build a bullet train, which is already going into effect and already kind of funded, I believe.
Right.
There's probably not a whole lot of discussion on the bullet train in the Transportation Committee.
That is correct. That's pretty much up and running. That happened before I came to the Senate. So we're focusing more on the Gold Line, the MetroLink, and how we can reduce congestion in SD20.
And of course, San Bernardino's a shining example of that. We've got a new transportation intermodal center coming. I can see it taking rise over there on E, and I believe it is Rialto Avenue.
Yeah.
And that's going to have Metrolink and XBX bus line coming into it, and a couple of other things in there too. That's really kind of cool.
It is really kind of cool. I totally agree. I think it can really help change the whole complexion of SD20 and help folks be able to get out of their cars, take public transportation, free up the freeways a little bit, get people to where they need to be a little faster, and help the environment.
Yeah, and I just have to point out to our listeners, and just for just a second, these appropriations and the things that are funding these things came from Prop 1A, 1B, and 1C years ago, which the voters passed, and it's not coming out of the San Bernardino City General Fund, even though the city is still in their bankruptcy chapter negotiations. Right. It's not coming from them. It's actually a joint powers thing.
That's correct, and I'm glad that you bring that up because I think the funding mechanisms, folks in general, don't always understand them. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and so this was money that was coming through our area, and if we didn't reach out and grab some, it would have just gone to another area.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It's kind of a good analogy for it, and up here in Yucaipa, where I live, we've got these beautiful planters up and down Yucaipa Boulevard, and that's our main strip. There's like one main street in Yucaipa, it's Yucaipa Boulevard, and we've got these trees and planters. It's beautiful, but we have to do U-turns all the time, and at first people grumbled about it. Oh, just like XBX. I hear it now, and they're grumbling about it. Oh, but you know what? You get used to making U-turns. It's not such a big deal anymore.
It's not too bad. That's right.
And it actually is a safety thing because now you don't have people crossing in front of you at the last minute and everything else. It decreases accidents. So that's kind of cool.
You're right. Yes, that's true.
And so it's good to be able to kind of voice my opinion a little bit to somebody who is on the Transportation and Housing Committee about that.
Yeah,
so
and I appreciate that. That's good feedback.
Thanks for listening on that.
You're welcome.
It's been kind of a neat experience for you. You got elected to state senate. And was this the first public office you ran for?
It absolutely was, and this is my first office that I'm holding.
That is so great.
Thank you. I'm pretty excited myself.
Yeah, and Senator Connie Leyva, you started off working just like everybody else at a store that I remember and with fond memories called Alpha Beta.
Alpha Beta. I loved Alpha Beta.
And were you a checker there? Or what
I was. I actually started as a courtesy clerk, as a box person. Did that, got promoted. I was a checker. I worked night crew a bit. I worked in the bakery department. I decorated cakes for a while. So I did quite a variety of things at Alpha Beta. Met my husband there, so it was an overall good experience for me.
Wow. Not many people could say they picked up, a loaf of bread and their husband at the
right?
grocery store.
Exactly. I got very lucky.
Well, very cool. Very cool.
27 years later, we still like each other, so that's pretty good.
And remind me to go to Albertson soon.
That's right.
I
never know what you'll find.
The lineage of Alpha Beta, I think it got purchased by
Ralph's and Food for Less.
Ralph's and Food for Less, which are both still in existence. And,
yes.
And they're still a company onto their own, aren't they?
Who was that?
Ralph and Food for Less?
Yes. Ralph's, Kroger is the parent company, Ralph's is the division of Kroger, and Food for Less is the division of Ralph's.
And Connie Leyva, Senator Connie Leyva, because I apologize. I have to keep reminding myself to say Senator because I knew you before.
Mark, I'm still just Connie. Senator is what I do. It's totally fine.
Okay. Well, you started off, and you know what you're talking about this because you had some affiliation with Local 11...
1428.
1428.
Yes.
UFCW.
Yes.
United Food and Commercial Workers Union.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I worked at Alpha Beta for a number of years. I got laid off, and then I was actually out of work for about 2 years with our infant twins, and then I went back to work at UFCW Local 1428, temporary, became a union rep, did that for about 8 years. And the president tragically died, and I was appointed by the executive board to take over as president. So I did that for 12 years. I was the first woman president to run a Southern California local, and during that time I was also the president of the California Labor Federation. Loved all of it. Very grateful for all of my experiences, and really have a passion for working people, and that's what prompted me to run for the Senate.
Fantastic story, fantastic, person to talk to, and she's up there, she's involved, and a great Democrat, and
thank you.
I have a little bit of a disclaimer that I'm vice chair of the Democratic Party in San Bernardino County, as well as a show host here and maybe operations manager. But anyway,
yes.
So there's a little bit of a Democratic lean, but that's a good thing because that
is a good thing.
So many AM talk radio stations have the lean the other way, so I figure
that's right.
I make no apologies.
you balance it out.
Yeah, far left, no apologies.
I like it. I like it.
We used to have a program called Far Right, No Apologies. So far left, no apologies. But anyway, it's been a pleasure and honor to have Senator Connie Leyva on. Thank you. She was recently elected on November 4th, 2014. And before we say goodbye, just Google her name and you can find out more about her and get in touch with her. She represents a whole lot of cities: Bloomington, Chino, Colton, Fontana, Grand Terrace, Montclair, Moscow, Ontario, Pomona, Rialto, and San Bernardino. All those cities, if you live in them, this is your senator, and it's good to introduce you to her. And one last parting word, Senator Leyva, if I can hand the mic over to you.
Just that I'm incredibly grateful to have the position I have and hope that I can make a real difference for all the constituents of SD20. I look forward to hearing from folks from the district and just really happy to be here.
Well, thank you, Senator, and it's been a privilege and honor to speak with you, and I hope you'll come back again sometime.
Absolutely, anytime, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And
bye-bye.
Thank you. KCAA 1050 AM. We're going to continue on with On the Mark Live. We've got a little more of a political show today, but sometimes we have interesting things about KCAA itself. Next week, we're going to have a magician on the radio. Some people say, well, how's that going to work? Incredibly well. I'll tell you why in a little bit. Also, we've got interviews coming up with Danny Alcrez from KCAA about our Latino block of music and how he represents the Latino community on KCAA every Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. And we've got a whole lot of things. We'll bring on a whole host of show. We've spoken with other people before. And, we're going to continue with the show. Another half hour coming your way. Good stuff. A gentleman who is very precocious and gregarious and fun to speak to. His name is Hans Johnson, and he's pumping up, to steal a term from Saturday Night Live, he's pumping up something called the George Legacy Project, the Congressman George Brown Legacy Project, the Congressman George Brown Legacy Project. So we'll be back in just a few more minutes with On the Mark Live. Take it away, Joe.
You've been listening to On the Mark Live with Mark Westwood, a show about KCAA, the world, and you, with more to come in a moment.
President Obama recently declared, "We've got to make sure we're writing the rules so that we've got a level playing field." Wow, so much "we" in only one sentence. He was talking about his Trans-Pacific Partnership, but who exactly is we? Not you and me. TPP is yet another global trade scam that'll ship even more of our middle-class jobs to places like Vietnam with its 53 cents an hour wage base. It'll let Big Pharma extend its worldwide price gouging of consumers. It'll encourage more environmentally destructive fracking of our communities. It will kill our buy local and other value-based government purchasing programs. It will allow foreign corporations to take over our public services. And, well, TPP will empower multinational corporations in the U.S. and 11 other nations to reign supreme over regular folks. Obama and his global corporate cohorts are mounting a massive PR campaign to get our Congress critters to rubber stamp this un-American, anti-democratic deal. Even the Secretary of Agriculture is being used to hype this corporate boondoggle. How embarrassing to see Secretary Tom Vilsack shamelessly shilling for TPP, which he knows will help corporate middlemen further squeeze family farmers. Bizarrely, Vilsack hailed the deal as a boon to farmers, claiming it would increase exports of U.S. farm commodities. Maybe, but dirt farmers don't do the exporting. That's done by Cargill, Tyson Foods, and other giant global marketers that profit by holding down the price they pay to our farmers. To paraphrase a verse from an old Western swing song, little bee sucks the blossom, but the big bee gets the honey. Little farmer grows the crop, but the middleman gets the money. This is Jim Hightower saying, that's a good line in a song, but it's ugly when our so-called leaders turn it into official policy.
You're listening to KCAA, your good neighbor along the way.
An airport security pig finds concealed truffles. It's the Onion Radio News. This is Doyle Redland reporting. Airport Swine Unit Specialist Kevin Hannes couldn't be prouder of his partner, Mr. Snout. The highly trained hog once again uncovered a stash of truffles hidden in luggage bound for Europe. After the pig rooted out nearly 14 ounces of the rare delicacy yesterday, Sergeant Hannes says for Mr. Snout, it's all part of the job.
Any traveler tries to conceal truffles on his person We're going to be there, and we're going to find them.
The team hopes to one day sniff out a concealed terrorist bomb, though to pull it off, the explosive device would have to be slathered in truffles. Doyle Redland for the Onion Radio News, online at theonion.com.
Here's a look at the KCAA community calendar. I'm Joe Flores. The Show and Go Car Show takes place Friday, May 1st through May 3rd in downtown Riverside. Car entries are $65 and limited to the first 1,000 entries. Get your vehicle registered today and get a dash plaque and program. Register before May 1st and receive a free t-shirt. All participating vehicles must be street legal and have auto insurance as mandated by the state of California. Trailers on the cruise route must also be registered. The Show and Go Car Show is brought to you by the Riverside East Rotary and Old Farts Racing Team. For more information, call Maylin Davis at 951-453-3548. That's 951-453-3548. Or go to showandgo.org. That's a look at your community calendar. I'm Joe Flores on KCAA 1050 AM. The KCAA Community Calendar is a public service of KCAA 1050 AM. To have your event featured on our community calendar, contact our studios at 909-885-8497 and speak with Di Rice.
Here's a look at the KCAA community calendar. I'm Di Rice. It's the George Brown Legacy Project, and you're invited to be a part. Help support the archives of the late great congressmen that were established at UCR. George Brown was a pioneer and a trailblazer who served in Congress from 1973 to 1999 when he passed. Brown fought for the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. He established the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970, and he was instrumental in creating a bill that became the NASA Authorization Act of 2005. The NASA Authorization Act supports research, development, and space exploration, Brown's passion. The George Brown Springtime Reception will be held Saturday, May 9th from 3 until 5 with special guest Congressman Pete Aguilar. For ticket information, please call 323-669-9999. That's a look at the community calendar on KCAA 1050 AM.
Get all the facts, all you need to know on KCAA Radio, AM 1050.
And now it's time to batten down the hatches, because here comes more of Mark Westwood and On the Mark Live. 3, 2, 1, Mark.
And as we continue on with that beautiful music that I just love, by the way, this is Mark Westwood on the Mark Live, and we've had a nice show already, starting with a delightful interview of the newly elected Senator Connie Leyva, who's already chair of the Democratic caucus up in Sacramento, which is a really big thing. And now we're going to continue on. We have got a great show topic and a great guest, and I want to welcome this gentleman who is he's heading the charge for the late Congressman George Brown and the Legacy Project to establish a congressional library at the University of California, Riverside. Hello, I'm going to introduce you to Hans Johnson. Hello, Hans Johnson.
Hey, Mark and listeners. It's great to be back with you.
Great to have you on, and such a worthwhile project. I hope you heard that we're promoting that here on KCAA, that upcoming event for the...
Yes, I heard the nice entry on your community calendar, and I really appreciate the advanced publicity and the background on George Brown's contribution. Yeah.
I was going to do this whole thing and read about George Brown. He's got so many great contributions, and maybe we ought to state it again, because every time I say, yeah, he was very integral in, helping establish a bill for NASA and the Environmental Protection Agency and these great accomplishments, people go, that one man did all that?
And he did it with the help of a great staff, and the many people whom he brought into public service are major factors in the many contributions he was able to register throughout his time in Congress. And some of those actually predate his period of congressional representation for the inland region, when he was elected in 1972 for a new district covering parts of San Bernardino and Riverside counties. He actually had a prior stint in Congress from 1963 until 1971, representing the east side of Los Angeles, stretching eastward to South El Monte. And that was the period in which Brown really became identified closely with the effort to get lead out of gasoline and many other consumer products, including paint, which he'd orchestrated in the state legislature in a 4-year stint there, but also his groundbreaking opposition to the military budgets of 1965, 66, and 67, when he became the first member of Congress on record opposing the escalation of the Vietnam War.
Such a mistake. Everybody recognizes that now, and it takes moxie and chutzpah to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to go along with this because, it's not the right thing to do. And he did that, and later on we all found out that wasn't the right thing to do, that's for sure.
He did it against the president of his own party, and there were some rather comical exchanges during those votes about inducements and subtle pressure applied to Brown not to be the only member of Congress to oppose those budgets by Carl Albert, I believe, at the time. And I think there was some presidential pressure applied as well. But I think it shows the willingness of Brown to be a vote for conscience and a vote for principle, something that he had shown earlier in the late 1930s when he was involved in integrating student co-op housing at UCLA with his then roommate, Luther Goodwin. George Brown's leadership in that example was challenging the racially restrictive housing covenants of the west side of Los Angeles. And effectively, what he was able to pull off with Luther Goodwin in their co-op arrangement was to integrate student housing for the entire UC system through that precedent on the west side of Los Angeles. But he wasn't done. Just a few years later, in an anniversary we've recently had cause to revisit because of the new publication of the book Infamy, which is getting rave reviews for its historical coverage of Executive Order 9066 and the racist anti-Japanese hysteria that accompanied that period, 1940-41 and early 1942, in the wake of the Pearl Harbor bombing and the summary removal of Japanese Americans as well as Japanese naturalized citizens and unnaturalized citizens who were residents of California and the West Coast at the time to internment and imprisonment camps throughout the western part of the country. George Brown opposed that very vigorously.
Very
and actually,
amazing
paid
man.
for it with his job.
He came from an era that was the same as my father, and in 1935 he was born. But 1944 is very, very interesting. He had already entered previously a few years back. He entered El Centro Junior College, but then was drafted. And in 1944, he entered the United States Army, and he did serve in World War II. And
are you speaking about George Brown or your father?
No, George Brown. I'm sorry, George Brown.
Yeah,
they're very similar careers there, though.
Well, it's also there's a little chapter that sometimes gets omitted from George Brown's bio, and I think it even cuts more intimately to his willingness to be a lone voice against prevailing sentiment, which was that he was a conscientious objector to World War II before enlisting in 1944. And Brown's experience in Cascade Locks, the camp, the civilian service camp that was his home between 1942 and early 1944, gave him a very searing experience with the language of jingoism and the ways in which United States dissent is not respected and often marginalized. And Brown had a deep appreciation for nonviolent problem solving, which was part of his commitment to the ethics of conscientious objection to war. Mm-hmm. And he did last 2 years in helping to set up a library and a study group at the camp at Cascade Locks before, in 1944, becoming convinced that he could do more to end fascism by actually being involved in the armed forces and the liberation of Europe at the time. And he did enlist and serve and actually became a champion for veterans as well as for conscientious objectors throughout his time in Congress. It's,
war is hell for everybody.
That few people understand, and that Brown, I think, because of his own experience, was very intimately familiar with and very credibly able to champion throughout his time in the federal legislature.
Yeah, exactly. And I've known this for a long time, and war is hell, and nobody wins in a war. It's just two governments fighting each other. It's really not people fighting each other. It's two governments, and the people become the tools of it. But the interesting thing about it is that every veteran that I've ever known that saw real face-to-face, hand-to-hand combat, and the hell that is so much against war, including my father. When the Iraq War broke out, he stood up and shook his fist at the TV screen and said, "Doggone it, you've got into something we're never going to get out of." And so many years later, we're still struggling to get out of that.
It's a beautiful subtlety, and it's one that few people are able to advance through high-level public service and through international policy, the way that Brown was through his time in Congress. You can see the lineaments of his insight about how to prevent war and how to stop war from being more deadly in his work against Star Wars in the 1980s, and his work later on in that decade into the early 90s around the show Capital to Capital, which was an ABC show that Brown helped create with the assistance of staff to bring Soviet and U.S. lawmakers into direct on-air debate through the use of satellite technology. Brown also was a big believer in people-to-people contact, language that we're now hearing invoked in the normalization of relations with Cuba and the opening of Cuba. People-to-people contact was a term that Brown helped to popularize in the 1970s and 80s through international academic exchange programs with Soviet academics, so that the human side of our adversaries, at least as it was painted in the press and through many other forms of political debate, were not demonized, and that there were exchanges open for U.S. academics so that some aspect of direct people-to-people contact could stop the rush to hostilities or the quickness of jingoistic pressing of panic buttons during that high-stakes nuclear standoff that we now look back on as the Cold War.
It must be so interesting. He's got, I believe, some 500 boxes of files from his congressional service that are trying to be established in a library.
Which are being sorted as we speak. One of the things that's so uplifting about this year, as we go towards the grand opening of the Brown Archives next year at UCR, is that the process of sorting those is underway, and they continue to yield some gems. Just last week, as a matter of fact, one of the archivists working on that sort unearthed a photo from Brown's appearance at Earth Day at UCR in 1990, when the celebration of Earth Day on its 20th anniversary was rekindled. And there's a great shot of Brown in a classic pose of oration with a hand extended, talking about the virtues of students' involvement in acting locally while thinking globally to recycle and to prevent the destruction of our ecosystem. Brown did hold the first hearings on Capitol Hill on climate change in 1977.
So far ahead of his time.
Yes, indeed.
And that's what happens when you send an educated man into Congress. He was a graduate of UCLA. He went to El Centro Junior College.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was employed for 12 years by the city of Los Angeles and became a management consultant before becoming mayor of Monterey Park. And, that's, why it's such a good thing to elect people who are educated and have some experience in life. One of the things I would love to just peep into his library is to read his writings and what happened with the Near Earth Object Survey Act. Wow.
Yes. Brown was the progenitor, if you will, of that Near Earth Object Survey, which was formally created by Congress after his passing. But Brown was the member of Congress who first called attention of his colleagues to the potential risks to the Earth from asteroids or comets or other objects in the Milky Way and beyond the Milky Way. And of course, many Americans woke up to that potential hazard through Deep Impact, a movie of the 1990s that brought some of that science, if not some of that hysteria to the big screen. But Brown was attuned to this starting in the 1960s and actually was responsible for getting attention to a broader survey of objects, asteroids, comets in the near Milky Way and also beyond that could pose a risk to Earth habitat. And there's a lot of science involved with assessing which orbits or which trajectories of objects could actually impinge on the Earth and cause a corrosive and destructive collision like the one that now scientists believe played a role in the destruction of the dinosaurs.
You wonder about something. I wonder about something, and it just came to my mind. And, this is the stuff that little jewels that you might find later on as you delve into these big boxes and files. Congressman Brown was way ahead of his time in talking about this near-Earth object collisions and asteroids and, NASA and all that stuff. And he's a true purveyor of, exploring space. And you wonder, he represented an area of Los Angeles that Steven Spielberg was quite regularly in and grew up in. You wonder if he ever met Steven Spielberg and they talked.
Brown's influence extends into popular culture. Many of the people who were performing and responsible for creating the series Star Trek, which was a forum for airing some of these considerations about science and extraterrestrial beings and the impact of our exploration of the cosmos on us and how it would play a role, collaboration in the space mission, how it could play a role in improving human relations here on Earth and potentially diminishing conflict. Those were issues that Star Trek dealt with throughout its 3 seasons on television. And some of the people involved in Star Trek, including Leonard Nimoy and the great George Takei, were close allies of Brown, supporters of Brown's, and people with whom he maintained contact throughout much of his time in Congress representing the inland region. So there's a rich and healthy debate that Brown maintained with a lot of colleagues who were thoughtful about science, but also about presenting science to the public, science education, and the priority that it played in Brown's congressional career and the pathways that he opened for science education were, I think, really remarkable. And they show that appreciation both of science and intellectual inquiry and popular culture and its ability to propound some of the principles of science to broader audiences is one that Brown was a real groundbreaker on, in addition to these other forms of and policy arenas that he is an acknowledged leader on.
We hear so many of today's congressmen disparaging healthcare, or disparaging this, or just doing partisan politics. He's a true great example, the late Congressman George Brown, of being an innovator. Not consternation, but innovation. And, isn't that a great way of thinking about it? He found solutions, and he was searching and exploring for ways to become greater and expand the universe. It's just incredible.
Well, it's important that you recognize that, because problem solving is really what Brown believed in. And he brought into public service a generation, or in fact 2 generations of people with whom he imbued a respect for problem solving as the core of public service. Some of them are still with us, serving like Mark Kcaa-On, congressman from Riverside, who just was elected in 2012 and was reelected in 2014, but who see George Brown as a touchstone for their own public service. And in San Bernardino County, I think we see people like Gloria Harrison on the Community College District Board, her colleague on that board, John Longville, and people who've been aides to various members.
John Longville served on his staff.
Indeed, as did Bobby Johnson for much longer. And Bobby now serving Chris Holden in the Assembly, representing the 41st District, extending into San Bernardino County, Rancho Cucamonga. Bobby doesn't get a lot of recognition, but she will be honored by the George Brown Legacy Project later on this year.
Oh, fantastic.
As will John Longville in our 2015 community service recognition.
And I remember back in the day meeting a kid named Robert Armenta, who was working for the late congressman, and I was just a kid then too. Most are kids, right? But anyway,
another great example. Another great example. Robert's now working with Planned Parenthood in the region, and a longtime developer of talent and an encourager of young people getting into politics and public service.
Robert was on the school board for years in Colton.
Yeah, indeed, and an example of it himself. So the people whom George Brown influenced and whom he encouraged to be involved in public service, as John Longville likes to say, really are in the hundreds, and many of them are still on our civic stage and are carrying on some of the values he espoused, progressive values like civil rights, voting rights, access to affordable housing, concern about the environment and environmental protection, and a deep respect for women's rights and for women's ability to control their own reproductive future.
And, John Longville, it might sound familiar to people if they ride Metrolink, because, this was something that would have been favored by Congressman George Brown, too. Metrolink is the train that you all ride through the Rialto train station. It's called the John Longville Metrolink station, and for good reason. It's because he was one of the very first people that said, why shouldn't we have a train and have mass transportation in California just like we have freeways? We pay for freeways that don't pay for themselves. Why not have trains that don't pay for themselves but yet provide, an economic stimulus to the area and good transportation for people who need it and clean transportation? And George Brown would have loved that.
It's very nice to note that some of the things that are named after George Brown, like his commitment to uniting L.A. and the inland region, are a focus of his priorities in Congress. Public education, with the elementary school in San Bernardino named for George Brown, equal justice under law, the federal courthouse that was opened after a considerable lobbying effort to extend the district court system in Southern California to Riverside, the federal courthouse named for him, and the freeway, the 210 freeway section in San Bernardino named for George Brown, as well as the Salinity Laboratory. You've mentioned the Near Earth Object Survey. And in fact, the international program around engineering for building materials to withstand earthquakes, also named for George Brown. These public efforts and public installations and public transportation sections are really emblematic of his view of the region and how it needed to be respected, constructed deliberately, and benefiting from protections for the environment, even as it was going through rampant growth. I think that really does carry on Brown's vision, and some of the things named for him reflect his priorities throughout his 4 decades in public service.
Indeed. And it's such a great thing. One of my photos that I remember most of George Brown, he was, with his whole staff and their families and everything else. Very much a family guy, very gregarious. Tell us a little bit about that part of George Brown.
Well, Brown was not. There were many parts of George Brown's family, partly because he married 4 times, and the families that he had, I think, were a challenge to him because they represented a set of demands on his life and bandwidth that didn't necessarily jive with politics. So Brown was not a saint. He struggled with his responsibilities as a father, and the memories that his siblings or that his offspring have of Brown are not always that of the ever-present and doting father. And I think it's a really responsibility of anyone dipping into the history and the legacy of a person, not simply to beatify them, but to recognize that we are dealing with a human being, and especially when it comes to public service and politics at the federal level. And to be honest, the hard-fought election campaigns that George Brown had to run in setting the record for the most close election victories of any modern member of Congress, you can imagine the stress and the deprivation of personal contact and family contact that sometimes created for Brown's schedule. As a result, the time that he did get with family, the time that he did get with his children and grandchildren, especially in later years, was really precious for him. And if you look at the records from the 1990s, you'll see a man reaching back to recover contacts with people that I think he believed may have gotten short shrift from him throughout his time in the national political stage of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And it's a very moving aspect of George Brown's work to see that effort to reconnect with his conscientious objector friends and colleagues, attending the reunions of Cascade Locks and visiting his grandchildren and their graduations. His last speech that he was slated to give in the summer of 1999 was at his grandson's graduation from Cal State Chico. He wasn't able to attend that in person, and he died in the summer of 1999.
Yeah, and he did die in office and serving our country. He was a great congressman, the late Congressman George Brown. We've been speaking with Hans Johnson, a very, indeed, a great person to purvey this story. You do such a great job, and you are helping to establish the library. We have an event coming up very soon in Redlands at a private home. Can you tell us a little bit about that if you want to participate in that, how they would get in contact with you?
Yes, I'd like to thank the host, Diane Landeros, well known to local activists for her many forms of service. It's on Saturday, May 9th from 3 to 5 o'clock in Redlands, and people can either drop a line to me at hansj@progressivevictory.com or look for information on our Facebook page, George Brown Legacy Project, or on our page at UC Riverside Library, and that is library.ucr.edu/view/George Brown. And that brings you to our page.
Well, we've been speaking with Hans Johnson. Thank you, Hans. The mission of the George Brown Legacy Project is to ensure the preservation and accessibility of George Brown's extensive archives at the University of California. Thank you, Hans. This is Mark Westwood saying so long, and take care. The On the Mark Live show will return next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Thank you, Hans.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks, listeners.
Thank you.
Hosted by Mark Westwood, a weekly show about this station, hot topics, local motion, and the world around us. Join us next week as we hop back on the KCAA Express for another ride on the Mark.
You're on board KCAA's Inland Talk Express. KCAA, Loma Linda, 1050 AM, the station that leaves no listener behind.
Good afternoon. It's a couple minutes past the hour. I'm Di Rice with local news on KCAA. A 33-year-old man was found dead by a relative in a residence in Big Bear yesterday. Authorities determined that George Kovacevic died from a gunshot wound. There's no word as to whether or not he was shot at the location or somewhere else. Anyone with additional information is encouraged to call the We Tip hotline